Hey everyone, welcome to episode 33 of Business Therapy, a show about helping real professionals solve real business problems. Every week, we invite a guest onto the show to help guide them through the normal pains and setbacks of working through their career. Using a mindfulness first approach, we help our guests find conscious solutions and help give them the tools to take on challenges that inevitably pop up during the ebbs and flow of business. I'm Sam Joshak, and as always, I'm here with Jonathan Adams. And today on the show, we have TJ Tann. Hey, TJ.
How you doing?
Great. Glad to have you on the show. Why don't you start by telling us a little bit more about yourself, your business, and how we can help you today?
Yeah, so I appreciate you guys having me on the show. My name is TJ Tann, co-founder and chief operating officer at Relai Incorporated. So Relay is a hyperlocal delivery startup. What we're trying to do is innovate in the last mile by using parcel lockers to decentralize the last mile and facilitate within an hour delivery for communities across the country. A little bit about myself. I graduated from the University of Richmond in 2021. While I was there, I started a storage and logistics company, ran that for about 3 years, and love kind of all things entrepreneurship, logistics, and business. Originally from West Philadelphia, and happy to be on the show. And I came on the show because we have this particular problem that we're running into right now. So initially ran some beta events where we did some deliveries for local businesses, more of a B2C approach, trying to connect directly with consumers via local businesses. But we found that it's better to go to the B2B approach to try and approach universities, municipalities, developers, to have them purchase our parcel lockers and then facilitate deliveries within their communities a lot easier. And a specific question that I have today, and which is why I want to talk to you guys to get a little bit of therapy, is building traction without having a proven track record. Another way to put it is, basically getting your first customer. So happy to be on the show, and it's kind of my dilemma at the moment.
So I'll start off, and I'll say that I guess in sports they say the hardest thing to do is hit a fastball, and I would say the hardest thing to do in business is to get that first client. So validate that this is a very common and critical challenge that all businesses have to get through. So I'll pause there.
Yeah, and I'll fire off a first question just to give us a little more orientation, because like Jonathan said, I think getting your first dollar, getting your first customer, however you want to say it, it is challenging and it's tough. And also you tend to be less confident because you don't have the track record yourself, but you've got to put yourself out there like you do. And there's a lot of different factors there. But before we dive in, let me ask, when you were doing the B2C model before you decided to pivot, were you able to sell any customers in that space?
Yeah, we were able to connect with. We were working with 75 retailers in the Richmond, Virginia area, and facilitated, about 300 deliveries. So that worked enough, but wasn't completely satisfactory. We didn't think that it would scale well.
Mm-hmm. And the sales cycle there, because it was, like you said, it was individuals, or you just felt like it wouldn't scale well because the sales process was more laborious than the return. Maybe give us just a little bit more context about that process and that experience.
Yeah, the sales cycle was too much of a lift at this point. It was literally going door to door across the city, trying to sign businesses up, and then going directly to market to consumers in the Richmond area and the greater Richmond area. And so being resource strapped, we just didn't have the flexibility to expand to another city or keep operations going.
Okay.
But were the sales that you were making sufficient to cover the costs of your effort?
Not entirely. We were operating at a a marginal loss that we thought if we kept going, it'll just grow. And so we were like, we need to pivot to something more sustainable. And that's where we kind of landed on the B2B approach.
Mm-hmm. And now tell us, I know you said it's tough to get that first customer, and it sounds like, have you been selling at the B&B yet? And you've been running into walls? Maybe talk to us a little bit more about the hurdles you've been running into and why you feel like this has been so challenging for you personally with the B2B
Yeah.
approach.
Yeah. So I'll give you a clear picture of exactly what we're trying to sell and what we're trying to accomplish. So if you can let's take universities, for example. And they typically have a small mailroom or a mailroom where the Amazon, UPS, FedEx trucks will come to campus, drop everything off in the mailroom, and what's left and what the mail supervisor has to do is organize all of those packages in a manner so that students can easily come and pick them up. But even when students come and pick them up, they're met with probably 45 minutes to an hour wait just to get to the window to get packages, right? And so what you have is this outdated mailroom and then this inefficient process for students to receive their packages, and mail centers to handle the volume in which the packages come. So what our solution is and what we're trying to propose to an institution like a university is say, hey, plop these parcel lockers down. And our parcel lockers are battery power operated and can be location agnostic because they don't need to be near any electrical outlets. And so let's put, 4 to 5 parcel lockers down across campus so that you decentralize that package distribution. So when the Amazon, UPS, FedEx trucks come to campus, they can just go to the lockers instead of dumping everything in the mailroom. And so that way the students, if they live near a locker, they never have to go to the mailroom to pick up the packages. All they have to do is get a notification on their phone, walk to the parcel locker, pick up the package, and go about their day. It's just a more efficient way to receive and distribute packages within enclosed communities. Now, I mentioned the universities because that is the clearest use case, but you can also imagine it's working for bigger development communities where townhomes is another example. And really the where we think it'll work at scale is with cities. And receiving and distributing packages across cities. But the problem that we're having is we're going to these universities, say, hey, we have this great idea. We think we can help you, save X amount of your operational costs because of the things that you're doing with your packages. And they're like, hey, this is great. Who else are you working with? Right. And at that point, we're like, well, we aren't working with anyone. We're just getting started. We're pivoting from our beta. This is what we've done. And typically we're met with, okay, that's really cool, but come back to us when you have 3 to 4 customers, or when you have 4 to 5 customers, because nobody wants to be that quote unquote guinea pig, right? Even though it might be a great idea, people need to see it in real life. And so that's like the wall that we keep running into when we approach these type of institutions.
Mm-hmm. Before we continue on the B2B, because I'm seeing a lot of similarity between the B2B and B2C potentially. One of the places that many startups go really wrong is the difference between solution validation and scaling. And so I just want to confirm, you were able to get paying customers for your solution. Like you said, you had 70 retailers who were willing to pay for the solution.
Yeah.
And what did you consider doing to try and scale that model to begin with? Because you convinced, like a large group of customers to pay for your service.
Yeah, and that was more of a grassroots effort. And so to continue that type of growth would require more grassroots type of efforts. And so that would look like going to a different area or city or municipality. And the more that you do it, the easier it gets, the more you can expand the team to do it for you. But the grassroots approach. Yeah.
I just think about the Uber experience. Like when Uber started out, they were in some model of efficiency. There was a person at the end of the app who was scurrying around trying to grab whatever car service company they could.
Yeah.
to complete the trip. Clearly not scalable. And they could have pivoted at some point to just saying, we're going to work with, car service companies only, as opposed to trying to be their own. But that decision point of what they were trying to scale, was a very, very critical point for them. You can imagine how they would have gone very differently had they not really thought through, have I validated my solution? If I have, now we could look to optimization and scaling, et cetera. So that's why maybe I'll ask the question a little bit differently. What was wrong with existing solutions for the B2C customers? Why did they buy from you?
Well, what we found was, so it's helpful first to let me explain our relay race style delivery process, because this is critical to it, right? And so the relay race style process, if you know the city of Richmond at all, it's not that large, but it's about 250,000 people. So you can imagine if you order something from the west side of Richmond, right, and you might be in the north side, or it's called the West End. You might be in the north side. You order something, and what we were doing was there'd be what we call a sprinter. The delivery person would get it from the storefront, deliver it to what we call an exchange zone, right, which is a point in which you hand it off to another sprinter, or you meet the shopper if they want to cut down on their delivery fees. And what we found was trying to make that point secure, because that's really key to a more efficient delivery within a city, right? Because we could do it via bikes and scooters primarily. Was that we needed a parcel locker to facilitate those deliveries, right?
What was the existing solutions? What was the alternative for a customer before your solution? What would have happened if they didn't have your solution?
If a customer wanted to shop locally and wanted delivery, there pretty much was no solution to the types of retailers that we were approaching. You could, if you wanted, think of anything besides everything besides food and beverage. You could get everything on Amazon, Walmart, Target, what have you. But if you wanted the unique product offerings of what's nearby you, there was nothing that existed. And so we were trying to aggregate that, as well as there was no way to efficiently receive delivery from a retailer nearby you.
And did you determine that there was a period of time that they wanted it by, like within an hour, how much were you able to validate, like, the speed with which the delivery mattered?
So the delivery mattered. Probably anything under 2 hours made a difference. We found, but because of the relay race style process, you can move products a lot faster if you use multiple people, and so we could do within an hour, like we can do within an hour, and that's part of the value prop as well, is that you can also shop locally, you can shop and support locally, but you can also shop even more conveniently than anywhere else online.
Well, and this is where the narrative, I think it's important that you finish the narrative you started, where in order to facilitate that model working, the secure lockers were a necessity, right? You were about to explain that last piece. And then I think that's maybe where you started to run into probably cost challenges.
Exactly. And that's the linchpin. So if you asked me about the decision point, John, and that's where, if we wanted to scale or even purchase or utilize these type of lockers that we believe are extremely important to facilitating this process, that's where we're like, okay, maybe we need to make this a little bit more sustainable, if we wanted to incorporate that into the process. Does that help? Does that make sense?
I think it's making
Sam,
sense to me. I just want to confirm something though. So because when you say it was B2C, and I think this is where Jonathan was pushing a little bit to make sure we understood, it's not a direct translation from B2C, the product, to a B2B model. You were testing something in the B2C model, and this locker concept became, like you just mentioned, the linchpin. But I assume, and I just want to verify the last part of the story, is the cost structure started to make the offering at a local or an individual level less palatable. Because I assume from what you're describing, when you had to install a locker network, it made this speed possible, it made this infrastructure possible, but it doesn't make sense to pass that cost on at the individual level. Is that more or less correct?
Right. Right.
Yeah. So the B2B model is not trying to translate a B2C product into a B2B space. It's really through your iterating in the individual customer space, you came across what seems like a very scalable business model that could solve a very real problem, but it has to be executed at scale to make the cost mechanics make sense. Is that more or less correct?
Right. Right. That's exactly what I'm trying to get at.
So then really it's more of a new product. It's almost, in a way, it's not even a story about a B2C company that's trying to take the same product and move into a B2B space. You're really starting a new company. I mean, it may be under the same brand, but I think energetically you need to be thinking, I'm starting a new company in a new space, and this is kind of a day one sales process in a way.
Yeah, it's a big shift. It's a big shift, and that's why I tried to frame it like, B2C to B2B to try and ease that understanding. But yeah, like you're right. It's almost entirely something new.
Because the key is focusing on the solution and what you're trying to scale versus the model. Like, because you'll miss the opportunity of potentially creating a new market, or you'll create a new market that's very specific to a particular use case, which is actually a good way to start. But the question is really, what are you trying to scale? What activity are you trying to scale? And so if you've identified that very well, then you could say, okay, we're going to try this approach. But you really have to be very clear about what's the solution that you're looking to solve, and how are you solving it, and then where are your challenges, to scale it once the market's already saying, yes, this is a problem. Yes, this is, I like your solution.
Yeah. And in some ways, to Jonathan, what he just said, this new B2B proposition is almost completely new from what I'm hearing and in my mind. And I think when you talk about, okay, here's the solution, how do I scale it? You're starting a new use case and scaling a new product in a way, because what you originally tried to do with delivery, you were iterating and you were pushing your process and you were discovering and experimenting, and you found that this was the product. This decentralized locker is the product. And I think being present with where you're at with the company now and unburdening yourself from, okay, this is where we iterated and came from, because it's almost like you're running a case study and then you stumbled upon, okay, this is the solution. And I think this solution could be scalable and is actually something I could sell, in a much easier way and build a business model around it. So in a way, you're stepping in new. But just to confirm one more part of your story, when you were getting pushback from your new customers that you've been selling to, did you try to bring the B2C success when they said, hey, have you done this with anyone else? Were you trying to translate that into space and say, hey, well, we've done it at this scale and done it like this, and that was not helping? Or did you not even try to bring that into the conversation? I wanted to make sure I understood that part of the story.
Yeah, we definitely tried to throw that in the mix. The problem was, we didn't utilize the lockers, and we were now trying to go sell them a parcel management system based around the locker, right? So in our test runs and our betas, we didn't use the lockers. We would, simulate where they would be to exchange that handoff. But you go to universities or different institutions to say, hey, now we have this network of lockers that you can buy. They're like, okay, where else are these lockers existing? And how have you been using them? And that was the gap there. But we did try to attempt to pitch that.
So in the first one, you didn't use the lockers?
No.
So how do you effectuate what you were doing? Just the runners?
Yeah, our delivery people. And we knew where they would go, And so we would simulate, if it were there, this is where the exchange would happen. And that was important to make sure that we could confirm and validate that delivery is actually faster through the system. But we just didn't have the lockers.
The need for the lockers was a discovery made in the first business. And to me, it's a very interesting tale. And I'll give you a perspective and see how this sits with you, TJ, because
Okay.
I think a lot of entrepreneurs struggle with this. And when you're talking about, well, how do I switch over and sell customers? You're making it tougher because you're looking at it because it was under your work and your name and kind of the energy you've been putting in, that it's your company evolving, but this is really two different companies. And that might be hard to see from your internal perspective, but from an external perspective, when I hear the story of what's happening, you started a business, that business ran its course through experimentation, through live market validation, and it helped you uncover a new product that you haven't yet sold. And that's okay. But when you go into the new company, you're not going to be able to translate much of what you had been doing over, except for the knowledge, except for the experience. And that's great. But when you're being present with it, I think part of this frustration is you bring a bunch of history with you, which is to say, I've been working on this for a long time and I should expect to be able to sell this to bigger customers. But if you had been present and started, this was day one, and you just envisioned this idea in your head, you might have approached it more cautiously. You might have thought about sales a little bit differently. But in fact, in reality, that's what I'm seeing, what you're dealing with, which is you are starting a brand new company. You're taking all your experience and knowledge from your first company over to it, but this is not an extension. And I think that's also going to be tough you're going to have a tough time connecting the dots with customers if you go into these conversations thinking that they're going to be able to, energetically speaking, these are two completely separate concepts. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And it's hard I hear what you're saying, and it's hard to imagine that, like you said, being in the seat that I am, because in my mind, you see this progression, but when you speak to somebody like right now, they don't see, what everything that you've been through, everything that you've been kind of working on. And that's really helpful. That's really helpful, because I think right now we're trying to find a language, the attitude to switch in that position, because also for like me, maybe a lot of entrepreneurs might feel this. So like you work on something for a long time, but then you come up, across this new thing or new idea, within the same umbrella, and it's trying to start anew, but you're not starting anew, right? Because it feels like you've been working on this for a very long time. And so, yeah, I like the way you phrased it. It's like unburdening yourself, and that's important.
How would it have helped or not if you would have had the lockers in the first go around?
It would have helped. It would have helped tremendously, because I think they would have facilitated faster and more secure deliveries. From like operationally, it just would have been a lot easier to instead of trying to text like, hey, I'm 5 minutes away, you're 2 minutes away, I'm here, where are you at? I'm here, where are you at? Dropping in a locker and then going about your business, would have been very helpful. And at the same time, it would have been incredibly difficult, just because of where we would want to place them. That would have proved to be provide some challenges, right? Trying to approach retailers, or private property owners to say, hey, this is what we're trying to do. And then trying to make that pitch might have extended our timeline. But I think it definitely would have helped.
How did you obtain from the customers what they thought the value was? So how
what do you mean?
So
okay.
You sold to them, they bought, and how did you validate like exactly what they valued in what you were selling to them?
So we did it via customer surveys, just a series of questions, like simple questions. How was this helpful? And from a scale of 1 to 10, what would you rate the service? And then also try and, speak to people, because we were doing it on a city level and it felt micro, just honestly kind of speak to people, get anecdotally what the service meant to them. And then trying to extrapolate that out. But yeah, primarily, customer surveys and face-to-face feedback.
And what did they value? So did they value like being able to buy local? Did they value like?
They valued for the consumer. They valued being able to shop locally easier, right? They felt like they were actually now having local shops approach them, right? And having the ease of trying to get something within an hour nearby was a huge value prop for them. Also was the flexibility, was the speed and flexibility of delivery, right? Because when you think of speed, you think of, okay, how fast can I get something? But the flexibility is really the key, right? Because we assume that the most convenient location to receive any item is at the doorstep of your home, right? Whereas really not. We were texting people at work to say, hey, do you want something now? We'll bring it to work. Are you at your kid's game? We'll bring it to your kid's game. Are you at a restaurant, right? How do you want to receive this, and where do you want to receive this? Because the most convenient location to ever receive anything is where you're currently at, right? And so that's one of the key discoveries that we found. We're like, okay, there's a lot more flexibility to be given to consumers in terms of receiving delivery.
And we could pivot to now to the new model with what you were calling the B2B. But again, like I'm always very focused on, was there a very clear value prop that was newly discovered here, which sounds like there was, and you did the hardest part, which was acquire a customer, so you actually had people paying for the service and give you value. And now it's how to scale it. And the determination was made that, we can't scale it in this model. But again, I think back to even, let's say, Airbnb, the founders were going around taking pictures of people's apartments themselves, like clearly not scalable, but they were really hyper focused on what are we trying to solve here and what's the market need. And if you tap into the need very strongly, then, you can look to a lot of scaling options. So I know we want to, shift to the other part, but it sounds to me like you went through very hard parts of the cycle. You had the service validated. We'd have to get into a lot more detail about the cost structure and everything else, but it does sound like there's a lot of opportunity there, and that you might have discovered something that I wouldn't be so quick to discard.
Yeah. And I think you're right. And I think where we got hung up is the lockers, because it's almost like a vanity to try and simulate what they did, right? Or what they could do, because we didn't have them. And we think that a true solution, right, to offer that true flexibility and that true convenience is with the lockers. And that's where presents the problem of, okay, we did this without it, but I don't know how we scale without lockers when we really believe that that's so integral to our success.
And this is where the story is one of that untethering that we were talking about a few minutes ago, where you are seeing a clear line of evolution in your mind, but no one else will be able to follow that. But I'm following it right now in this conversation. And I think what Jonathan is helping you point out, you had a very clearly articulated value proposition. It's not that value proposition doesn't exist and customers don't want it. You're running into a problem of infrastructure capability. The lockers they came to you and this is a new age, not a new age, that's not the right term, like a modern solution that I can actually build this infrastructure. And the thought, I can follow it in your mind about, okay, well then let's go sell this, but it's not quite the same thing. What you're doing is you're selling a whole new product with a whole new value proposition. When you started the show, you talk about, when I go to a university, when I go to a city, I'm talking about, taking down their operating costs, or making it more convenient for this entirely other use case. But the connection is that use case could start developing an infrastructure of these decentralized lockers. And then you could go back and unblock the first product you were creating, but it's a separate product, unrelated. So the thing is, when you think about this, could all roll into an umbrella of different services for TJ's company as the master of decentralized locker infrastructure. But you're not going to be able to mash those together or make one transform into the other. You're kind of building two separate things. You're working with two separate value propositions. And in that way, that's where I'm encouraging you, if you're present with that notion, selling this new product, trying to understand how you can sustainably create this decentralized locker infrastructure, which could unlock a ton of innovative products that you've already been contemplating. That's a new sell. It's a new concept. And when you brought on how do you build traction with that, I think this is now a good segue into, well, where do I start with these B2B clients that say, oh, you've never done anything? Well, the first is you need to come in without any baggage. And you need to know that I'm selling a new value proposition to a new client base. And then you kind of need to sit with yourself or your team and think to yourself, well, how would I do that? And then you go back to the drawing board, and then we can talk about strategies that would help facilitate that. But I think this is like a major unblocking thing, or it should be for you. And it's a matter of presence, which is you're not coming from where you don't have to bring everything back from where you came from. It's now you have a new value proposition that you need to develop and sold separately.
And so what you're talking about is like a strict delineation of like, this is what it was, and this is what it now will be, right? And leaving what it was in the past.
Yeah, I wouldn't even say that it is what it was. I think from what you were doing, that thing still exists. And that's what Jonathan's really focusing on, which is that business is just waiting to be rekindled when new factors come into the environment. It's just embers that need, and it's that experience has helped you shift your focus. But the new business, this B2B model, this insight that you've received, this is a new business. And it's not even about what it was. It was never that thing, and it will never be that thing. That thing is still its own business, its own life, its own value prop, its own product. Mm-hmm. This is a different direction you have been inspired to go right now through your experience. You're putting a pin in what has been done. So I wouldn't even say it's buried or it is what was.
Gotcha.
This is something new, and it should be treated as something new. It's on a whole different stream of energy.
Oh, no, go ahead. Go ahead, John.
Problem is not different, then just be careful in how you're describing what's different now. Because if you get overly focused on a solution, you box yourself in, because if that you won't be able to adapt to what the market's asking you to do or the need that's available, because you're so focused on solving it one specific way, as opposed to having multiple potential ways of solving it. So I think it's innovative, but it's for the market to decide that. Now, you could say there's a big difference between going to individual entities versus going to a university that's its own infrastructure. And that's very interesting. But at the end of the day, how much is the overlap and the problem that you're solving the same, and how much is it different? Because that's going to say a lot more about the difference in your effort than a particular solution.
Mm. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. And what resonates with us, and like what we like, the line of thought was something, what Sam mentioned a little earlier, was that it's almost like you start one to finish the other, because they, in our minds, and what we see is that they can seamlessly be integrated, which right now they're very different, right? But you can imagine, and just to give you a little bit more context of trying to approach municipalities and say, hey, we can facilitate local deliveries a lot faster. And the value prop for them is more sustainable delivery, reduce vehicle miles traveled by large trucks, reduction of tons of emissions and within local municipalities, um, while at the same time using that first model of, okay, now we connect with local businesses, the city is in on the infrastructure, and they can be married together. Um, but currently, like it's these two different things. Um, but no, I definitely hear what you're saying and trying to be flexible, remain open, and fixated on the problem. You know.
And
Yeah.
Oh, go Sam.
Well, and I just wanted to reiterate that what you're describing, what you just sounded back, this is the presence piece of doing business, because you can envision a future where all of these things will align. But when you want to sell now, your clients don't know you. They don't know your story. They don't know your vision. They can't see how the pieces come together. They don't have your knowledge. They don't have it. And to be candid about it, they don't care. And it's not your job to
Right.
make them care. If you're going to approach them, you're approaching them in the present moment to try to give them something to solve their problem, to really get them to mutually work with you and exchange energy now. And that energy is what's going to help you build your product and build your vision. But if you're walking into the office trying to sell something for you to create this future state of like this company or this infrastructure, you're going to really struggle because the client is not there with you. And that's where it's really important to keep yourself in the here and now. And like Jonathan is saying, focus on the problem you're trying to sell. And like I said, I believe from listening to you today, this is a new problem, an exciting one. And I think you have a great knowledge and the expertise to solve it. But you've got to go in clear-minded to these conversations with these new B2B clients and know what the problem is that they have right now on hand and what you are going to do to help solve that problem. Because it is through that type of exchange that you're going to start building energy to move the company in the direction you want it and fulfill all these grand visions. But the schemes and the visions and the roadmap is only going to distract you in the present moment.
How detailed is your ideal customer or decision maker, if it's like a university or municipality? How detailed is your profile on that individual, the person who actually who has the authority to decide to purchase your services?
So it's different and varies between institutions. So if you think about it from a university context, the person who feels the pain is the mail center supervisors, managers. These are the folks who organize staff to facilitate folks receiving incoming mail and then distributing that mail on campus. Those are people who feel the pain. Those are the advocates. But the people with the checkbooks are typically the next level up might be a director of auxiliary services or a director of facilities services. It might even be the VP of business development at a university. And those people want the people running their operations to be happy and to get the latest new tool to run efficient operations. So that's the university.
And how do they make decisions on other purchases over which they have authority? So what influences like their other
mail center managers or
the people that would have the authority to write the check? So right now they I assume they have a bunch of services that they're purchasing all the time when they roll, and you're trying to sell a new service. But how do they decide on their current services?
So they typically decide it depends on who the service targets. So our example is the mail center manager, but you also will have like trying to think of a business in like a cafeteria to sell like software to run better cafeteria operations. And so the head of cafeteria operations would then go say, hey, I got this new tool, and then go advocate for this new tool to the person who would then make the decision to whether or not to buy it or not. And so an advocacy kind of avenue where people feel like they need something, they want it, they make their case to their boss, and then it's decided. And it also can be from a number of other pressures around the university. So it might be a big issue of like, when I was in college, like bikes, access to bikes, right, was a big issue among students. So that might put pressure on the person at the university or at that level, to then do something about it and then go search for solutions. The other way might be a top-down model where the senior leadership or administration says, "Hey, we're getting really pressed about, X, Y, and Z issue." Right? Where it could be something as simple as like not having enough paper in a printing machine, and then they make kind of put pressure on that person to then go search for a solution. And so it's a confluence of different factors. If that answers your question.
Is there a publication or trade show or like some place that they're monitoring, or some publication they're monitoring for the latest in the different operations over which they run?
I'm not entirely sure. I can't imagine there is. It's kind of like I spend a lot of time like with entrepreneurs and a lot of people thinking about business and progress in a forward thinking way. But if you approach these people, they're pretty much just concerned about the day to day. Like you talk to a VP of business development for a university who's been working there 11, 12 years. They think they know all the tricks of the trade. So 100 be like, no.
Yeah. Well, and Jonathan, I assume you're talking about different ways to gain credibility, right? Without selling.
It's and overcoming the inertia of not making a decision. So you need to create the safer choice to make the decision to do this, as opposed to, letting the pain continue. And if they can only tolerate a certain amount of pain in a particular user group, then fine. Then you just need to, how to amp that up or show them that there's an existing solution, et cetera. But if there's other things that influence them, you want to identify like literally like their social lives, they're like, where are they spending their time? Who are they interacting that influences them, that makes them think something? Because you want to target any nexus between them and the input that they're getting and be able to present, this, because you can either be something new that's untested, untried, or you could be something new that people better gobble up before, there's
right.
price increases or you grow. Right. You could be one or the other, but if you're approaching it from like, from a perspective of how do I get my first customer, like you're already in a position that there's almost an assumption that this is going to be a hard slog. But if you're invested in the solution that you're solving, as opposed to anything else, then it's how to make everyone else see the problem the way you're seeing it and how to make this seem like the safer choice.
I see what you're saying. You're saying almost like trying to approach it a little differently.
So like in the municipalities, you mentioned like congestion, or maybe it's bad for the environment, et cetera. If you could show that your system would reduce the carbon emissions by X, or your system would reduce congestion by Y, then there's a solution that some politician or some municipal, responsible person is not availing themselves of, even when they're saying that we're very green or we're very this, et cetera. So in other words, like you have to see where the pressure point is, what's the problem, and invest there. So like if there's some conference that municipalities are going to on how to reduce their carbon emission or how to reduce congestion, or there's a traffic, meeting or something, that's where you need to be. Because
and
just seeing you there would grow your credibility regardless of your track record.
Yeah, that's right. And it's really speaking to, again, that idea that you're not selling lockers to businesses, you're selling solutions to problems. And Jonathan is trying to reinforce that you need to be really clear on the problem that you're selling a solution for, because if you're focusing on the problems that these customers have, then you can start thinking about, how do I appear in the places that there are other people trying to solve this problem? And how can I appear in a list of solutions that are viable for people trying to solve this particular problem. But you got to know the problem first, and then you got to know your sweet spot, which is you have a number of solutions you could offer with your experience and your knowledge and your capability, which is like this decentralized locker concept. You know how to deploy it, but what are they trying to solve? And then I'd also, let's pause there and let that sink in. And then I have another tack for you as far as prescriptive advisement.
Okay. Yeah, let me, because I've been taking notes. This is good stuff. But yeah, go ahead. This is really helpful.
Well, I was going to say Jonathan's point is really smart in terms of overcoming resistance, assuming that the resistance is, just because you're not speaking to them quite one-on-one in a way that's just going to, you just really put the key in the lock, you know what I mean? And it's really just unlocked it from them. I would like to also kind of follow this conversation we've been having. And you were saying, well, how do I do this without credibility? One thing that I do want to reinforce is another way to think about it. If you're kind of buying into this concept of, okay, these are new problems we're trying to solve, this is a new business direction, you've already created a business before. And when you remember back to when you first started your first product, you didn't just think, oh, I can sell to anybody I want to and walk in there with no clients or whatever. You probably started, like a lot of entrepreneurs do, in your organic network, finding early adopters, finding people who would partner with you on a new product, help somebody who's a young business really get some relationships going. I would really remind you to kind of go back to the basics when you talk about, if people are saying, because it sounds like you're getting the conversations, if people are pushing back on you and saying, well, who have you worked with? Who are your other clients? Maybe it's like a signal to you that don't try to keep going to the same types of clients that require that level of credibility, but find the early adopters, find the people in your network. This is a new product. Don't think to yourself, I have the experience and I'm evolving from one thing to another, but you're day one at a new company. And most entrepreneurs, like Jonathan was talking about with Uber, with Airbnb, they have to get scrappy within their network. And in a way, you are starting over, which can sound intimidating, but also, again, it should be unbinding, and you should be going in with a different set of assumptions, which is, before I go to the university head or before I go to these larger contacts and go through that selling process, who can I test the solution with that I'm trying to solve a problem with at a smaller scale? People I know, smaller businesses, people within my entrepreneurship network. Build that book with smaller examples, but again, of the new problems you're trying to solve, not of the old problems you're trying to solve. And go to the path of least resistance. Because again, I think a lot of what I heard you walk into the podcast with was this presumption that I should be able to sell these B2B clients because I have experience in this space. But a lot of times that resistance you're getting is a clear signal that you need to start smaller again and go through your paces. And that's what a lot of people need to do. And then if you combine that with the Jonathan strategy of, okay, let's get really smart about how do I build credibility? How do I tackle the low hanging fruit? How do I really articulate the problem? Then you're starting to build something that you can scale to stronger clients, go in and have conversations with more, bigger fish, basically, that are more revenue potential and things like that. But I do think it's a good reset point to really think, how do I get back to what I know as an entrepreneur? How do I leverage my network? How do I leverage the things that I have available to me and not try to go out of my zone and overextend myself? Because that's where you get a lot of frustration and spinning your wheels.
Mm-hmm. So you're saying to look inward, network-wise, to try and, I like this path of least resistance, trying to find somebody personal.
Yeah. You also want to consider starting with a place, or if there's any scenario or use case where your solution would be the only solution, even if you have to scope it really far down. So if there's a municipality with incredibly difficult, traffic laws or zoning laws, like where, the current infrastructure is creating a problem for, an Amazon or whatever, where it's a much more pronounced problem. Or even if there's just a time of year, like, Christmas time or whenever there's a lot of, packages, that need to be delivered, is there an opportunity that there's, a gap between existing infrastructure and what you can do? Because that's usually the best place to start with a new use case. And that's about scoping. Yeah. And that's a scoping issue. So that,
sorry, go ahead.
No, go.
I was saying, and that, along with Jonathan's recommendations, finding the smallest municipality, the ones that are more experimental, following, you want to scale, you want to have a big company, but you're forgetting that big companies never start by selling the biggest clients in the market. Like you're restarting, right? You're restarting your book. So don't sell the strongest opportunity on paper. Find the little guys, the people that need help, the people that want to work with you or are willing to experiment with somebody where you're at, and then actually build the client book. Because it's almost like the way you're thinking about it is, well, how do I get past the resistance of people saying I need credibility? Build the credibility. Find the places where there's opportunities for you and put your energy there. And then you can iterate and you can build up from that point. And that's always the healthiest way for businesses to grow, in my professional opinion.
Airbnb started at places, I think, where there were political conventions where, or other events that totally booked up the existing hotel infrastructure. So they had a known gap and a known need that they could solve through their new solution. So that, if there's a analog not all municipalities or universities are equal, because there are some that are going to, that's why I was so focused on what's the profile of your ideal decision maker, because not all of them will have the same exact concerns that make your solution ideal. But once you can turn the easier and the path of least resistance, that you can then use for everything else, for all your other customers you want to turn. But the first one is a real exercise in knowing the market, knowing your target, et cetera. And that's probably why your first business was so successful, because you knew the school, like you knew the people. So there was probably a lot of things you were doing that were just instinctive based on what you knew about the demands, the problems, et cetera, of a very specific local area in which you were working.
Yeah. You guys are talking about amplifying the impact, because you go to that smaller municipality or a different type of university, and the impact is amplified, right?
Especially friction and solution that overcome.
Yeah. And again, just a greater principle that overlays all this that I hope will help solidify everything in the consciousness aspects of it. A lot of times when we think about sales, the path of least resistance thing, I'm going to say it a different way. When you're running into resistance, you got to think, this is not something I have to break through or beat down or work my way through. It's not the right customer. There are customers waiting out there that are perfect for you. And when you talk to them, they're going to want to work with you and they're going to want your product. Sales is a matter of finding the interface that is the right timing and the right problem, and you being the right solution for it. If you're running into a bunch of resistance, that isn't the right product, and it's not the right timing, and it's not the right people. So it's not, how do I break through that resistance? It's, how do I turn my focus to find where I can amplify your impact, where you're the right scale for the right experimental mindset of the customer. Finding that, and it shouldn't be, that's the work. But once you get into the door of those opportunities, you're just shaking hands and you're making it happen, and it's exciting, and both parties are excited. It's not about, how do I get through people who don't want to be talking and working with me and make them want to work with me. That's always an uphill battle in any context.
And your track record is, you had so much demand, you couldn't keep up with it, that you needed to, change your approach to be able to just keep meeting this need. But you've already been successful in this area. So that's really exciting. And I think you see both Sam and I are excited about what you're working on and the possibilities. So at least we're energized.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Yeah, I always, I love talking about this stuff. And, when Eric, contacted me, I was like, absolutely. And so this is always helpful for me. I imagine this is helpful for every entrepreneur that comes on here. So sincerely, I really do thank you guys.
Yeah. So how are you feeling now? I know we've been throwing a lot at you, and you've been absorbing. So we're getting close to the end of our time. So where are you feeling right now? Do you feel like we've helped you work through your problem a bit?
Yeah. And specifically, I feel better about what you mentioned as the consciousness of kind of transitioning, or, trying to have two different pursuits exist within the same entity, and trying to hyper focus on, like you said, John, the solution, and then also trying to find that path of least resistance to amplify the impact, right? Those things are concrete. And so, yeah, I feel a lot better. And feel like I received some real therapy.
Great. That's always our goal. Well, thank you so much, TJ, for coming on the show. It was a pleasure. And if you or anyone else you know would like to jump on the business therapy, go ahead and let us know. Leave a comment. We really enjoyed the discussions, and we're looking forward to talking to everybody next week. Thanks, everyone.